Bonjour, this is Anton, and you're watching Foreign and Tunes. Today's country is going to be about the language of love, the land of art and minds, the home of the Eiffel Tower, croissants, and edible snails. We are talking about France's animation. Oui, oui, vive la France, and all that. Seriously speaking, I think France is a nice country to take a look at in terms of animation, because it not only helped to give birth to a few techniques, but also greatly enhanced the potential of other techniques. Its movies and shows inspired other artists, and in turn helped inspire the French. It is only fitting that a country that made its mark in animation deserves a look, and hopefully you will check out the works I discuss within this presentation, both good and bad, the avant-garde and the conventional. And right before I start, I should mention that since there seems to be a lot of crossover with Belgium in the production side of many of these animated properties, I will be taking a look at Belgian animation in this video as well. We'll battre le fer pendant qu'il est chaud, or strike the iron while it's hot. We will start by looking at Charles-Émile Renaud. His works dated back to the late 1800s, where the moving pictures were displayed through a projecting praxinoscope. His works were painted directly onto the transparent strip and then manipulated by hand to create a circa 15 show, using 500 images per title. They were primitive in movement, but a step in how to animate, and unfortunately people slowly forgot about him as the cinematograph came into the picture. He was so poor and bitter that he threw away much of his irreplaceable work and unique equipment into the river known as the Seine. Now that people are rediscovering the work that remains, they can really see where animation truly got its start. Then there is Émile Cohl. Cohl was a caricaturist before getting into animation at the age of 50. It is unknown how he got into the position of animating. Some say he was offered a job on the spot one day. Others say that the company Gaumont, which we'll speak more of later, stole an idea from one of his strips, and when Émile confronted the studio about this offense, they quickly offered him a job as a scenarist. Whatever the case, it led him to dabble in the art of animation, becoming especially fascinated after the successful use of stop motion in the short comedy film The Haunted Hotel. And no, there is no relation to Luigi's Mansion 3. He has been known by many for being the first to do quite a bit for the art of animation, with people even calling him the father of the animated cartoon. He has been said to have been the one to pioneer puppet animation, pixelation, and even the first ever animated series. Most of these are lost, except for at least one short, the short that is said to have been the first hand-drawn animated cartoon ever made, Phantasmagorie. Some even went as far as to say it might have been the first animated thing ever, but we know now that this isn't exactly correct. It is, however, the first hand-drawn animated cartoon. It has a style akin to drawings on a chalkboard, and it was revolutionary in how the stick figure characters experienced different objects and even themselves morphing into other shapes or items. It was called a stream of consciousness style. He animated them by putting a drawing on the light box, photograph it, trace onto the next sheet with light changes, photograph that, etc. He made two more shorts in this style, The Puppet's Nightmare and A Puppet Drama. Finding it to be difficult to do, he moved away from drawn animation after the last short. His later works involved strange transformations in The Joyous Microbes, some great matte effects in Spanish Moonlight, and loving puppet animation in The Little Faust. He later experimented with films using joint cutouts and matches, the latter of which was a favorite of Émile's. Émile even made an animated short comedy called The Neo-Impressionistic Painter, which involved a painter who was not really a neo-impressionist but was really incoherent. Émile later moved from Gaumont to Pathé to create live-action films. One of these was considered by some to be an origin of pixelation. Pixelation is when stop motion is applied on a live-action person, essentially a way to become a professional animation. Two other notable animated films he did were Brains Repaired, with some of the most remarkable transformations at the time, and the mostly lost The Spirit's Revenge. It is unfortunate that this latter short is mostly lost, because it might have been the first film to combine live action and animation, directly drawing on the live action film. Émile Cohl has done much more, such as The Newlyweds and Les Aventures de Pierre Nicolet, though some of his works is unfortunately lost. The only short of Newlyweds that still exists is Le Portrait de Zouzou. What can never be truly lost most, though, is how the man's accomplishments helped breathe new life into the art form of animation, inspiring people like Winsor McCay to make their own strides in animation. The same art form will be experimented in a variety of ways in the years to come. Cole was not the only Frenchman experimenting with animation every now and then. In 1924, an experimental film was released, a Dadaist post-Cubist art film that was conceived, written and co-directed by artist Fernand Léger, collaborating with filmmaker Dudley Murphy. The film is known as Ballet Mécanique. While it is a mostly live-action piece, there are a few instances of interesting stop-motion. There are many French comic series that were created, and many of them are co-creations with Belgium. They were once printed in a newspaper-like format, but then were published in albums, which were a book-like format of the Franco-Belgian comics. They often had fun, funny, and exciting adventures that were often infused with the subtlest of social commentary. Since it might get a bit confusing if I mention all of their adaptations at separate times, I decided I will mostly mention certain comics and their animated adaptations once I get to when they were first created in the original comic form. One of the most well-known and well-received comics was The Adventures of Tintin, a fully Belgian comic that was also popular in France, as well as other parts of the world. It was first created and published in 1929 by Georges Remy, better known by his pen name Hergé. People like the Hergé art style in these comics, known as clean line, or in French, ligne claire. The stories were well researched and were able to straddle a variety of different genres, as well as using slapstick humor that is offset by a touch of political commentary and/or sophisticated satire. Tintin first got its stride in the realm of animation with the stop-motion film The Crab with Golden Claws. It was a bit hard to find a physical copy for this adaptation due to financial issues regarding the company who produced the feature. Tintin then started on TV in a black and white cartoon show starting in 1957, soon turning to color as more episodes were created. This cartoon was a Belgian production, being the first production for Belvision Studios, and the series was known for differing from the original stories of the books, even changing whole plots. Over 2 decades after the first movie adaptation, Belvision created their own animated movie in 1969, titled Tintin and the Temple of the Sun, based on the stories The Seven Crystal Balls and The Prisoners of the Sun. While one of the stories was condensed, the movie was still considered pretty faithful and spawned a sequel, Tintin and the Lake of Sharks. Though the animation style was praised for being better than the first movie, the story was not as compelling. In the late 80s and early 90s, a new TV adaptation of The Adventures of Tintin was created. It followed closely to the majority of the comic book series, sticking so closely that even frames from the books were transposed onto the screen. There was even a bit of 3D animation used when depicting the moon rocket. Of course, I should mention that there was one more animated adaptation in 2011, which I'm sure some of you are already aware of, titled The Adventures of Tintin, The Secret of the Unicorn. It was created by the team of Steven Spielberg, Peter Jackson, Kathleen Kennedy, Stephen Moffat, Joe Cornish, and Edgar Wright. It used a motion capture 3D style for its animation, and some have said it was the best movie to do so. There were also children's books from France that gained some national and international attention, sometimes thanks to animated adaptations. One of the most well-known, if not the most well-known, was a series of picture books that starred the character known as Babar the Elephant, created by Jean de Brundthoff. It was about an elephant who goes to the big city after escaping the jungle to get away from a hunter who killed his mother. Having experienced the city life, Babar returns home to teach his fellow elephants about the benefits of civilization. He is soon appointed king after the last one died from eating a bad mushroom, and marries and has children, teaching them lessons as life goes on. Oh, and the elephant woman he married is his, cousin, because royal intermarriage was a thing back then. The story was adapted into English by Winnie the Pooh creator A.I. Milne, and the series grew with more books even after the original creator's passing. Babar the Elephant was considered innovation back in the day, with how it portrayed its stories and pictures with very few words. However, some criticism was levied on the series, as some saw it as a justification for colonialism. In any case, with its success expanding decades, adaptations soon came along. There were television specials by Bill Melendez Productions. The story of Babar the Little Elephant in 1960 1968 and Babar the Elephant Comes to America in 1971. Atkinson Film Arts created another television special, Babar and Father Christmas, in 1986, and then a few years later, Nelvana produced their own television series based on the books. The series was well received for its fun stories, while not shying too far away from the darker aspects sometimes presented in the books. There were actually also two movies produced by Nelvana, the first called Babar the Movie, involving the siege on Babar's kingdom by a clan of rhinoceros, and Babar the King of the Elephants, which is pretty much a retelling of the first 4 books of the series. In the 2010s, Babar was given another Nelvana show, this time in CGI, and it is called Babar and the Adventures of Badu, a sequel series of sorts to the original stories. One interesting animator who is not really French but worked heavily in France is the Hungarian Imre Hajdu, better known by the stage name Jean Image, this last name based on the French pronunciation of image sounding like the first syllables of his name. After emigrating to France in 1932, he began working on films and produced several shorts. He soon became influenced by Walt Disney's animated classic style, and he actually became the first French producer of a full-length animated film, which was Johnny the Giant Killer in 1950. He also made other films later down the line, like Bonjour Paris in 1953, Aladdin and His Magic Lamp in 1970, Little Orbit, The Astrodog and the Creatures from Outer Space in 1979, and The Secret of the Selenites in 1984. Before all of that, though, he founded the Film Jean Image company, and then in 1960 he devoted time to producing cartoon series for television. The most popular cartoons that came from this were Kitty the Clown and Joe the Little Boom Boom. In 1933 there was the short Une Nuit sur le Mont Chauve, which is actually Night on Bald Mountain, predating the Disney version from Fantasia. This version was directed by Alexander Alexeyev and Claire Parker, and the duo invented a device specifically for the short, the pin screen apparatus. This device gave the impression of animated engravings, a big step in implementing different looks and techniques for animation. In a way, some might find it even more disturbing than the Disney version. Another step for animation came in the form of The Tale of the Fox, directed by Ladislas Starevich. Yes, the same man who created animated works with dead insects as his models. It was the first fully animated stop-motion feature film. It would have been the first stop-motion film, period, beating The New Gulliver, as the former was completed in 1930 and the latter was released in 1935. However, the filmmakers did not have a budget to produce a soundtrack until 7 years later, and it was a German soundtrack. A French version did not exist until 1941. Its stop-motion animation is impressive for the time, albeit a bit jilted. Regardless, it is still one of the first animated feature films, and one of the first stop-motion films, and its influence can still be experienced in films decades later, like Fantastic Mr. Fox and Isle of Dogs. Another Franco-Belgian comic that gained some attention, though not as much as Tintin or some of the later comics we will talk about, is Spirou and Fantasio. Spirou and Fantasio are a pair of young journalists that are similar to Tintin in that they go on fantastic adventures around the world. Unlike Tintin, they're usually there to report on these adventures, but they end up being in the center of them instead. Spirou actually came first, created by Robvel for the Spirou magazine in 1938, published by Éditions Dupuis. He was an elevator operator in his first appearance and remained wearing the bellhop outfit for a while, even after the occupation was dropped. The name Spirou actually means squirrel, and in some cases mischievous, so it makes sense for him to have a companion squirrel, who is named Spip, by the way. Eventually the property was brought from Robwell by the publisher Dupuis, and the comic strip then had a succession of authors, the first of which was Joseph Guillain, pen name Giger, and he was the one to introduce Fantagio in 1944. The strip was soon handed to Giger's understudy, André Francois, and he was the one who expanded the strips from short serials and single gags to long, complex adventures. He also added a number of additional supporting characters such as Count of Champignac and Secotin, but the most notable creation he made was the fictional South American, yellow-black spotted monkey-like creature called the Marsupilami in 1952. One of these Marsupilamis was a companion of Spirou and Fantagio. Marsupilami is actually a portmanteau, Marsupial ami, which is French for friend, and Pilo Pilo, the French name for the Popeye character Eugene the Jeep. The Spirou and Fantagio comic series eventually gained some form of animated entertainment. The first one was simply Spirou, and the second one was called The New Adventures of Spirou and Fantagio. Now, interestingly enough, the Marsupilami never appeared in either of those cartoons. However, the species became popular enough to have a spin-off comic in 1987, and that led to a few animated shows of its own. There was a Disney version that existed in raw tonnage in 1992 before getting its own show the following year. It took some liberties, like adding in a gorilla friend named Maurice and a poacher named Norman, and the Marsupilami could speak while the original comic character could only mimic sounds like a parrot would. The show also had other segments, one starring Sebastian the Crab from Little Mermaid and another starring Bill Cobb's Schnookums and Meat before they gained their own show. The handling of the show got Disney into some hot water as they ended up getting sued by Marsu BV, the owners of the Marsupilami character. Their reasoning was that Disney breached their contract of producing 13 half-hour shorts. The shorts they did make were only 6 to 8 minutes. They also said that Disney did not secure a commitment from a network to air the show, nor did the company do a good job at marketing the project. In 1997, Marsu was awarded $8.4 million, and the judgment was upheld on appeal in 1999. There was then a cartoon homemade in France that took breaks and came back from 2000 to 2012, and it was better received and more faithful by comparison. The first version of the cartoon aired in 2000, where the Marsupilami had a wife and 3 children, and went on adventures with or without them, sometimes saving his children from the reoccurring hunter Brigham back alive. The second version was in 2003, titled My Friend Marsupilami. Involves the Marsupilami family befriending a human family, the Dujardin. The third version ran from 2009 to 2011, titled Huba Huba Hop, involving a different family befriending the Marsupilamis. That family is a preteen boy named Hector and his aunt Diane, and the show has a reoccurring villain, a megalomaniac industrialist named Felicia Devor. The final version aired in 2012, Our Neighbors, the Marsupilamis. This one has the Marsupilami family living with a veterinarian and his 4 children. There is one more notable comic that you may have not heard about before, but it's pretty big in Europe, and that is Lucky Luke. Lucky Luke is a Western-styled series of comics created by Belgian cartoonist Morris in 1946, published by Dupuis. Morris wrote and drew the series on his own until 1955, when he started collaborating with future Asterix co-creator René Goscinny. Lucky Luke is both a parody of and a homage to the Western genre. It takes place in the American Old West and stars the titular Lucky Luke, a gunslinger who shoots faster than his own shadow. He's supported by his horse Jolly Jumper, and sometimes the parody of Rin Tin Tin, Rantan Plan and Rin Tin Dam in some versions. He's pitted against many foes, which are either fictional or inspired by folklore or history from America. The most famous of these foes are probably the Daltons, based on the real-life Dalton gang. You may consider them a cross between the Beagle Boys and Big Dastardly. So in terms of animation, that character's first foray is 1971, with a film titled Daisy Town, directed by Goscinny and co-written by him and Morris. The next film they made was in 1978, titled The Ballad of the Daltons. This time Goscinny and Morris co-directed with the help of Henry Gruel and Pierre Vatrin. The next film and the last one to directly involve Morris was The Daltons on the Loose. Morris co-directed the movie along with Ray Patterson, and interestingly enough, the duo William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. This was because this film was actually a compilation of 3 episodes from a TV cartoon that was in production at the time. Hanna-Barbera collaborated with Morris in production companies France 3, Extra Film Berlin, and the Gaumont Film Company to produce an animated TV series for Lucky Luke. Morris collaborated with another company, IDDH, to produce a new Lucky Luke cartoon in 1991. In 2001, the same year Morris passed away, the animated company Shilam, a company we will mention again, produced yet another Lucky Luke series, and this one is arguably the most successful of the bunch, titled The New Adventures of Lucky Luke. It lived up to its new title as it contained new stories rather than adapt any old stories like the previous 2 series did. It was successful enough, running from 2001 to 2003. Xilam later produced 2 spin-offs, one based on the dog titled Rin Tin Dam and the other based on the Daltons, titled The Daltons. Xilam even produced an animated feature film in 2007, Go West, a Lucky Luke adventure, directed and co-written by Olivier Jean-Marie, and that is the name you'll be hearing again soon. In 1949, a French film was released based on Lewis Carroll's story, Alice in Wonderland, directed by Dallas Bauer. It was noted for its impressive use of stop motion for most of the film, with a few live-action actors being present, even if the film overall is not one of the best, but also found itself in some controversy. It was made pretty close to when Walt Disney was making his own version, and Walt ended up blocking the release of the British version of the film from a US release, an act that caused quite a bit of controversy. Arguably the biggest comic to come out of Belgium and France is The Smurfs, or Les Schtroumpfs, a spin-off of Johan and Pee-wee, created by Peyo. The prototypes of these tiny-sized blue creatures were introduced in a story La Flûte à six trous, The Flute with Six Holes, in 1958. The Schtroumpfs were very well received and eventually got their own series of comics, mostly overshadowing Johan and Pee-wee. The word Schtroumpf sounds like the word Strumpf, which is the German word for sock, but Peyo said he forgot the French word for salt. So when he asked his friend, Marsupilami creator André Francois, to pass the Schtroumpf, Francois jokingly replied, "Here's the Schtroumpf, when you are done Schtroumpfing, Schtroumpf it back." They spent the rest of the weekend talking in the Schtroumpf language. The word Smurf was actually a Dutch translation of Schtroumpf. It was simply carried over to English. The mostly male species all wear Phrygian caps, which is considered a sign of freedom. They tend to be named by what archetype they fulfill, like Brainy Smurf, Clumsy Smurf, Grouchy Smurf, and their stories tend to be simple tales of bold adventures while trying to protect Smurfs from the wicked plans of the wizard Gargamel. The Smurfs have been described by some people as promotion of socialism, though some people like Peyo's son dismissed the claims as grotesque and frivolous. Of course, due to how popular these blue beings became, they had animated adaptations. In 1965, there was a black and white animated film that was a compilation of 5 animated shorts, and it was called Les Aventures des Schtroumpfs. There were actually 10 shorts total. In 1976, there was another movie by Belvision Studios titled La Flûte à six Schtroumpfs, based on the Johan and Pee-wee story the Smurfs originated from, and it was written and directed by Peyo. The film did not get a release in the United States until 1983, in order to capitalize on the success of the Hanna-Barbera cartoon at the time. Speaking of which, that began in 1976 when a media and entertainment entrepreneur Stuart R. Ross discovered Smurfs during his travels, and he quickly struck a deal with Peyo and the comic publishers that brought the franchise to America. NBC president Fred Silverman then discovered the property through his daughter and decided to task Hanna-Barbera in creating a Saturday morning cartoon. It became a major success and one of the longest running Saturday morning cartoons in television history, running for 9 seasons, over 200 episodes, and 7 television specials. Keep in mind, the amount of content produced from that one show was a rarity back then. In 2017, a CGI film was created called Smurfs: The Lost Village, mainly focusing on Smurfette. It wasn't exactly well received, but it was still considered to be much better than the live-action films. Another greatly popular French-Belgian comic that was created and published at the end of the 50s was Asterix by René Goscinny and illustrated by Albert Uderzo. It involved Gaulish warriors, mainly the titular Asterix and his best friend Obelix, and fighting the Julius Caesar-era Roman Republic. These warriors would gain temporary superpowered strength by drinking their own special magic potion. The comics were well received due to their layers of humor, ranging from character name puns to parodies of other countries. There was a black and white live-action television film that featured an animated Asterix and Obelix called Duo Romain en Gaul, though it isn't really about the duel. The first true movie was Asterix the Gaul, created in 1967, the same year as the television film. This film was actually created behind the backs of the original comic creators, and when Goscinny and Uderzo finally saw the movie, they didn't like it, and neither did most of the audience for the comic. So the creators then stopped the original sequel from being made, and since then, these creators were usually called upon to consult with the making of each subsequent film, starting with Asterix and Cleopatra, which was considered a far better production to the predecessor. There was then the 1976 film The 12 Tasks of Asterix, which was actually co-written and co-directed by Goscinny and Uderzo. It is an entirely original movie, not based on any of the comics, and it is the first and only Asterix movie to use the xerography process. The series then had animated films in the 80s and 90s, which were Asterix vs. Caesar, Caesar, Asterix in Britain, Asterix and the Big Fight, and Asterix Conquers America. A new animated feature came out in 2006 called Asterix and the Vikings, which had some references to pop culture at the time. Finally, there were two CGI films in the 2010s, Asterix The Mansions of the Gods in 2014 and Asterix The Secret of the Magic Potion in 2018. All of these films were based on various albums to varying degrees, with the exception of the last one, which was an original story. One interesting animator who did his work in the 50s and 60s was a Polish citizen of Paris, Walerian Borowczyk. His early films were surreal animations, some of which were only a few seconds long, and some included comic abacaderia, which is an inscription consisting of the letters of an alphabet, almost always listed in order. His most acclaimed films in the late 50s were Once Upon a Time and House. He continued working on animation with the nightmarish The Games of Angels and the stop-motion short Renaissance, which features destroyed objects reassembling themselves. His first and last animated feature before moving exclusively to live action was Mr. and Mrs. Cabal's Theater. It is a series of loosely connected scenes, like a vaudeville program. The Cabals performed surreal, absurd, and even sometimes cruel acts. The animation is a mixture of drawn and cutout, with some clippings of old illustrations and photographs. There is even a processed live-action appearance from Borowczyk himself. There are occasional colored elements, but the film is mostly black and white. The sound design also deserves a mention for adding to the surreal atmosphere of the film. Miss Cabal speaks using a collage of cut-up human sounds. It is completely illegible, save for a few instances where subtitles are used to translate what she said. Walerian Borowczyk bowing out of animation after that could be a good or a bad thing, depending on who you ask. Me, I like some surreal animation, but even I have my limits. Jean-François Laguani began to dabble in animation after meeting working animator Paul Grimault, and that is a name you will be hearing again soon. The two were friends, but Paul and Jean-François worked very rarely, basically Paul helping to get his friend started. Laguini's first short, The Girl and the Cellist, helped win him an award thanks to its beautiful painting-like pictures. Then, after a few more shorts, honing his skills, Jean-François' Rowing Across the Atlantic helped him gain more recognition. Afterwards, he expanded into creating feature films. His first feature film is the 1985 Gwen or the Book of Sand, which involved a post-apocalyptic desert world. It got critical acclaim and some award recognition, but went mostly unnoticed by audiences. Over a decade later, Laguani made his next film in 1999, A Monkey's Tale, which did garner a bit more recognition and even an award win. His third film in 2003 is Blackmore's Island, about a 15-year-old boy who sets out to find buried pirate treasure, but that ended up being probably his least recognized film. His next film was The Painting, which experimented with both animation and live action, and he received an award for Best Feature Film for his work there. His final two films were Louise by the Shore, about an elderly woman and a dog spending time at an empty seaside town, and The Prince's Voyage, a follow-up to A Monkey's Tale. In 1969, the character of Rohan was created. Rohan is a French comic series following the adventures of an intelligent prehistoric man, often combining the positive social attitude of a true leader with the inventiveness of a true scientist. There was a TV series in the 80s which Jingle had ties in making. There was also an animated series in 2008 made by Shilam, a studio which we will discuss more later. The series was titled Rohan, Son of the Dark Age, and it has some differences from the comic. For example, magic normally being the result of ignorant misinterpretations of physical phenomena, but the series features a villain who clearly uses magic with no scientific explanation as to how. The 70s saw the start of the works of Albert Barillier, who was a television producer, screenwriter, and cartoonist. He started off with making the stop-motion series Les Aventures de Colarjol, involving a bear who wants to sing and travel the world, but lacks the natural ability. Albert later found Procydus and created the Once Upon a Time series. Each series distinctively focuses on different aspects of knowledge. The series are Once Upon a Time, Man, Once Upon a Time, Space, Once Upon a Time, Life, Once Upon a Time, The Americas, Once Upon a Time, The Discoverers, Once Upon a Time, The Explorers, Once Upon a Time, Planet Earth, etc. In 1973, a up-and-coming animator, René Laloux, started experimenting with animation. He did so with other interns while working at a psychiatric institution and made one short, Monkey's Teeth, with the help of a studio of Paul Grimault, and we will talk more about him. Laloux later met Roland Topor, a French surrealist artist and writer, and the two collaborated collaborated on Dead Time, The Snails, and the feature film The Wild Planet, but most people know it now as Fantastic Planet. It is based on the 1957 novel Ohms Linked Together. Fantastic Planet shows a stunning sci-fi world through the use of cutout animation. René Laloux directed other sci-fi movies later on. He worked with Jean Giraud, aka Mobius, aka Gear, to create the 1982 animated sci-fi movie Time Masters. It took great use of Giraud's artwork, and it was a Hungarian co-production. It was based on the 1958 novel The Orphan of Perdite. This novel happened to have the same writer as Ohms Linked Together, the work Laloux previously adapted. Laloux then collaborated with French comic book artist Saza to create the borderline style, psychedelic, bizarre and somewhat risque sci-fi film Gandahar. The film was based on the 1969 novel The Machine Man vs. Gandahar, and it was animated by SAK Animation Studio, which is based in North Korea. You gotta take what you can get sometimes. The movie had a big English release, being named The Light Years, with a few talented actors and a translated script by famed science fiction writer Isaac Asimov. However, it also had some changes, including one scene being removed for being too sexually explicit in the producer's eyes. So despite the talent involved, it garnered little attention. And most people would agree that Gandahar in its original French form is the superior version. Jean-Paul Ravens, better known as Picha, started off his career as a caricaturist and cartoonist, working for National Lampoon and the New York Times. His passion for drawing led to him creating comics and later animated movies. However, as this was the 70s where animated movies like Fritz the Cat became popular, he went in an adult route, and by adult I mean his movies depict sex. His first movie was co-directed by him and Boris Sulzinger, and it was a parody of the Tarzan brand, titled Tarzoon, Shame of the Jungle. The estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs found out about this film during production and sued the makers of the film for alleged plagiarism, but the state lost the case because the French court deemed the film as a legitimate parody. The film was originally rated X, but eventually got re-edited to VR when coming to the USA and got an English dub, with the likes of John Belushi and Bill Murray, actors you may have heard of. They even had Tarzoon be voiced by Johnny Weissmuller Jr., the son of the man who gave Tarzan his distinctive yell. However, the makers had to re-edit the movie one more time to cut out the Tarzoon name and change it to Shame, because the Burroughs estate filed another suit, this time saying that the Tarzoon name desecrated the wholesomeness of the Tarzan trademark, and the judge who found the suit agreed. Eventually what happened was that the movie in its original form did much better than the English release. Picha did not let this bother him, and he continued on to his next project, The Missing Link. Oh, I wish. No, this is yet another adult film, except set in the prehistoric times. It was successful, but not as much as Tarzoon. 4 years after its release was a redub in English, where it was retitled BC Rock. Major changes to the film included new dialogue, a new score, and the songs written for the film were replaced with different songs. This version did not gain much attention at the time, but seemed to gather a cult following later. Afterwards, Picha's films did not get released in America. What was released in his home country was The Big Bang, a sci-fi adult comedy. It was just a small success, indicating that this type of comedy was slowly fading away, so Picha took a break from films and moved on to writing for cartoons and television. He did Zoo Olympics, Zoo Cup, and Buddy Buddy, A Dog's Life. All of those were considerably more wholesome compared to what Picha made before. However, in 2007 he made a brief comeback with a new adult film. This time it was Snow White the sequel, making a spoof on fairy tales at the time when Shrek and Enchanted were popular. 1980 saw the release of what has been considered to be one of the greatest masterpieces of animation, Paul Grimald's The King and the Mockingbird. However, this feature film had a rocky history decades before then. As mentioned before, Paul Grimald has already been animating for years, with an animation technique that has been described as satirical, delicate in style, and lyrical in nature. He created quite a few warmly received animated shorts. Paul founded the company Les Gemeux with the help of producer André Sarrou in 1936. Paul even inspired people like Jean-François Laguanib to get into animation, as mentioned previously. Paul Grimald's contribution became the second significant venture for French animation, following in the footsteps of Émile Cohl. Paul later on met poet and screenwriter Jacques Prévert. Jacques then began working as a writing partner for Paul for at least one animated short before it was decided that they would create a feature-length animated film based on the Hans Christian Andersen tale The Shepherdess and The Chimney Sweep. However, Paul and Jacques ran into trouble when the cost of making the film became so expensive that it caused Les Gemeux to shut down. The producer of the film, André Sarrou, decided to take the film out of their hands and just release the unfinished version in 1952 against Grimald and Prévert's wishes. It was released as The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep, but when that version got translated and dubbed in English, it was known as The Adventures of Mr. Wonderbird. The version that was released in 1952 is not horrible per se, and does feature about 20 minutes of footage not found with the final official version, but it was clearly not what the creators wanted and strained Paul's relationship with Andrei. Eventually, in 1967, the makers got the rights back for the film and proceeded to secure the financing needed, going through a whole decade to do so, and then complete the film as they intended on their own. Jacques unfortunately passed away before completion, so Paul dedicated the finished film in his memory. This completed film, the one they intended, was given a new title to differentiate itself from the previous release. Even though The Shepherdess and the Chimney Sweep are still technically the main characters, the characters people will remember most when watching the feature are the King and the Mockingbird, hence the title The King and the Mockingbird. The film now runs at 87 minutes compared to the previous version's 62 minutes, contains new animation, a different musical score, and a brand new ending. It is quite obvious in places where the old animation ends and the new animation begins, and vice versa, but it does not hurt the overall movie and kind of adds to the surrealism of it. The King and the Mockingbird ended up being loved by many people who appreciate animation. The surrealist quality of the film is displayed well with the king's use of contraptions and shortcuts littered around and within his palace. There are also bold colors and shifts of scale and perspective that disorient what the viewers would normally see as realistic. Even Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata were influenced by the movie, with Miyazaki stating that the movie helped him understand how it was necessary to use space in a vertical manner, and Takahata stating that Grimold was able to achieve better than anyone else a union of literature and animation. In 1988, Paul Grimold made a live-action animated hybrid called Turning Table, which featured many of his earlier works, including The King and the Mockingbird. In 1982, there was an experimental stop-motion science fiction film directed by Piotr Kamler. It is a film known as Chronopolis. It tells the story of a giant city in the sky, colonized by jaded and bored immortals because of sad immortality. They decide to manipulate elements of time to amuse themselves, like constructing odd objects, and use them to help in playing with electricity and atomic particles. This includes a ball that communicates with higher technology. In reality, they are waiting for the ultimate gift to arrive in their hands. This film was released at the same time as another film, The Angel, and both films have been considered the beginnings of contemporary animation. The Angel is more in abstract terms, however, because it is mainly live action and live puppetry. 1985 to 1987 saw the airing of Spartacus and the Sun Beneath the Sea, or The Engulfed Worlds. It is a series about the lost city of Arcadia, deep within the Earth's crust. With most of civilization believing the Earth's surface life was destroyed, Arcadia survived by the light of Terra, the artificial sun, but it is dying. So a group of young Arcadian kids and teens defy the law and enter the city's archives, finding out that the surface world is still alive. The kids and teens then create a messenger, Arcana, to send above to seek out help and save civilization. Now I want to discuss a few CGI shows that just happened to be the first CGI cartoon shows ever created. Yes, it turns out the reboot was not the first CGI cartoon show to air on television, as was insinuated in one of my previous videos. It may have not even been one of the first North American CGI cartoon shows. Granted, when googling first CGI animated show, reboot is the first thing to pop up, but a bit more research should have been done to make absolutely sure that was accurate. So now that this is all rectified, let's talk about these CGI shows. Geometric Fables has been said to have been the first of these, and it tells classic fables while depicting the characters and settings in simple shapes. Another TV show released was Insectors, which was about a planet inhabited by two bug species, the Joyces and the Yucks, who got into a war with each other when the Yucks tried to steal the potential fuel source of flower stalks for themselves. There is also some backstory about how the planet came to be, but I'd rather let you watch and discover for yourselves. Quarks is probably the most well-received of these shows and the first to be produced in HD. It was created by Maurice Benayoun and Belgian comic designer Francois Chouten, and it is presented as a documentary of sorts, as the Quarks are meant to be these invisible, omnipresent little creatures that defy the laws of physics, possibly an explanation for the world's imperfections. Michel Ocelot is another notable animator who before was mainly working on shorts involving silhouettes and cutouts, inspired by the works of Lotte Reiniger and Carol Zeman. He first got recognition for a TV show called Gideon, based on French storybooks by Benjamin Rabier. He then expanded his cutout and silhouette techniques with shorts like The Three Inventors, Beyond Oil, The Legend of the Poor Hunchback, and The Four Wishes of Villain and His Wife. He even had TV shows shows like The Impassive Princess, Sinasi, and Dragons and Princesses, the last of which was computer-generated but still tried to keep the silhouette look. He made films that were a compilation of the first TV series, and his last TV series, Princes and Princesses, based on The Impassive Princess, Tales of the Night, and Ivan Starevich and the Changing Princess, both based on dragons and princesses. He even helped in making a music video for Björk using some of his silhouette style. His most notable work was ironically not related to silhouette or cutouts. The movie he is best known for is one based on West African folk tales, Kiriko and the Sorceress. It is a story about how a little boy named Kiriko was able to save his West African village from the wrath of a sorceress named Karaba. The film was notable for its African aesthetic and its surreal visuals, though some were turned off by the animated feature due to non-sexual nudity present within the film. There are still many who admire the film, including the likes of Isao Takahata, who directed the Japanese dub. The film has two sequels, one being a collection of short stories, Kiriko and the Wild Beast. It was the first time Ocelot collaborated with other writers and directors. The second film was in CGI, and it was called Kiriko and the Man and the Woman. He also has used CGI for the features Azur and Asmar and The Lily in Paris. Another animator who rose up to high regard was Sylvain Chomet. He has done only a few animated projects, and it seems to be slowly going into live action, but his creations are still worth checking out. He started his career with comics in 1986 and became a freelance animator for the Richard Purdom Studio in 1988. He worked on commercials and wrote some comic stories, getting to work together with French artist and comic book writer Nicolas du Crécy in award-winning comic books. In the meantime, Chomet started working on his first animated short, The Old Lady and the Pigeons. Crécy designed the backgrounds for the film. It took 5 to 6 years to make, and once it was released, The Old Lady and the Pigeons received numerous award nominations and wins. Then, within a few years later, Chomet made his first animated feature, a co-production between France, Belgium, Canada, and the UK, The Triplets of Belleville. It is a story about an elderly woman who goes on a quest to rescue her Tour de France cyclist grandson. He was kidnapped by the French mafia for the purposes of gambling, and he is taken into a fictional city, an amalgamation of Quebec City, Montreal, and New York City called Belleville. The elderly woman is accompanied by her grandson's dog, as well as a trio of 1930s music hall singers, the titular triplets. The film has very little dialogue, so the story is mostly conveyed through song and pantomime. The film was a critical success and helped Chomet become more respected in many circles. However, this success comes with a price. The visual style of Triplets of Belleville seems to be similar to Nicolas de Crécy's graphic novel, Le Bibendum Céleste. Some may say a little too similar. Crécy himself felt that Chomet's movie borrowed too heavily from, maybe even plagiarized, his own works. Needless to say, Chomet and Crécy never worked together again after that. Chomet did not let this dissuade him from continuing his work, though he cancelled a project called Barbacoa due to the lack of funding. So after a few delays and being fired from directing The Tale of Despereaux over creative differences, he created his next and so far last animated feature, The Illusionist. Chomet's works were heavily influenced by mid-20th century French popular culture. He actually based the movie off of an unproduced script by French filmmaker, actor, screenwriter, and mime Jacques Tati, which Tati created as a personal letter to his estranged daughter. Employing many of the same animators as the Triplets of Belleville, it is about a struggling illusionist who visits an isolated community and meets a young lady who believes that the illusionist is a real magician. Chomet thought that the movie was not a romance, but a relationship between a dad and a daughter. There is some controversy about how it handled portraying the real-life event, and how the daughter, who was the inspiration for the script, Helga Marie Jean, did not seem to receive real credit in the movie itself. Nevertheless, it did gain more stellar reviews as a movie on its own, and got award recognition. Chomet became well respected enough to where he was hired to direct the animated music video of Carmen for the band Stromae, and he was one of the artists who was given the chance to animate his own Simpsons couch gag in the episode Diggs. Now that I think I got all the major films, animators, and animated franchises, there are quite a lot of other shows and movies to talk about, so I'm going to do my best, though I may mostly talk about them in groups. One individual show to talk about is Billy the Cat. It is about a boy who acts like a brat who is punished by turning into a cat and has to spend his life to redeem himself while living said life as a cat. Like many other shows we mentioned earlier, this is based on a comic. It is mostly comedic series, but there are some differences between the show and comic on how they handle the humor, as the comic is a bit darker in areas. The most obvious example is when Billy is turned into a cat in the television series. It was because a magician saw him bullying a cat and wanted to teach the boy a lesson. In the comic, what happened was that Billy carelessly ran out of the street and got run over by a car. He is sent into the afterlife, but the number of misdeeds he did makes it unlikely for him to get to heaven. Billy is given a second chance, however, so he is reincarnated as a cat and now has to live that life while making up for his past wrongs. Another show that involved some comedy is Cornell and Bernie, also known as Watch My Chops, after Cornel's catchphrase. Cornel is an intelligent dog who can read and write and is smarter than most people. He doesn't want people to know about his intelligence, preferring the life of a pampered pet, but a pin-headed man named Bernie barks, dog-sits Cornel, and learns of his secret. The two have bickered but also developed an uneasy friendship, with Cornel often using his intelligence to bail Bernie out of situations. Bernie has often capitalized on Cornel's reluctance to communicate, as Bernie is lacking in intelligence and devoid of morals and ignores Cornel's requests. It originally aired in 2003 with traditional animation, and then it came back in 2014. The new version used flash animation and had more bizarre adventures. A different type of series that did not rely on comedy is Chris Colorado. Chris Colorado is about the titular captain who lives in a world where Earth is in a mega war and survived a great disaster from a meteorite crashing on Earth. The event was known as the Great Crash. The survivors got together to create a more peaceful society and the World Federation. Chris is recruited by the World Federation commander to be a primary secret agent in the war against Thanatos, a dictator human wearing a helmet. Chris is then told that he is the son of a famous member of Centurions of Freedom. The Centurions of Freedom charged to infiltrate the army of human-turned cyborgs led by Thanatos. But Chris's father disappeared and has been presumed to have defected to the enemy. Many felt that the man became a traitor. Even Chris believes his father betrayed them. Chris then goes on dangerous missions and meets with mysterious people in order to find out the truth about his father, his family, and secret behind the Great Crash itself. It is a spy thriller with a borderline animation style juxtaposed to CGI backgrounds. One other piece of animation history deserves a mention because it was based on a video game series entirely made in France, and it is quite anime-esque. These cartoons, based on massive multiplayer online role-playing games, are Wakfu and Dofus. Wakfu involves a magical world where a boy was left with a bounty hunter. The boy named Hugo learns that he has magic, known as Wakfu, and now uses it to protect his home and find out about his past. Dofus came later as a prequel animated series, though the game it was based on actually came out before the Wakfu game. The series takes place 200 years before the timeline of Wakfu, and it follows the adventures of the character Cherubim at various points of his life. He narrates these points to his adopted son and their housekeeper. One last show to mention before going into some movies and production companies is Last Man. It is about a world where magic is reality, and a tournament is sponsored by the king and queen. Richard Aldana lives in the corrupt Paxtown, having no ambitions in life, just using boxing as a way to keep annoyance at bay. He's not interested in joining the tournament known as the Fist Fight Funeral Club, a big event in Paxtown. However, his friend and the owner of the boxing club he attends gets murdered. Now Richard has to protect his deceased friend's daughter, a task that leads both of them into a quest that is bigger than either of them could have expected or wanted. It was a comic that got a prequel series meant for adults, and this time adult implies that the violence is brutal. It was described as a French manga, even Dragon Ball inspired, so it makes sense that it would be pretty violent. These episodes were mainly directed by Jérémy Perrin, who is no stranger to violent imagery, as he previously directed the animated music video for Dice Fantasy. Before I tell you about some other movies and some production companies from France, let me tell you about the shorts that I find quite interesting. There is Le Building in 2005, made by a group of final year film students at Gobelins, L'École de l'Image. The 5 people who wrote and directed the short went on to have further careers in animation, though Rémi Zarour became a comic book artist under the pseudonym Pozla. The short film depicts a series of slapstick accidents that caused destruction to a 3-story apartment complex. Another intriguing short to highlight, if only briefly, is Madagascar, a journey diary. It is an intriguing look at a trip around the island country of Madagascar, exploring the customs and towns, mainly searching to learn about Famadihana, which means the turning of the dead. The short is shown like an actual journey diary, with the pages turning to each new experience, and represented through the animation that blended hand-drawn and CGI. Now I want to talk about a few other notable movies before I move on to a few of the French animation companies, as whatever you think of them, they can still spark some imagination. The first one to mention to start off easy is a small movie called Raining Cats and Frogs, a story loosely based on Noah's Ark. It involves a group of frogs who predict the disaster that it will rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and tell a boy and a girl to help save animals in a zoo. I find it interesting because the animation seems reminiscent of the animation collaborations done by Raymond Briggs and Jimmy-Tei Murakami. Another one to mention is another Academy Award nominated film, A Cat in Paris. It is about a cat that leads a double life. By day, the black cat called Dino lives with a mute girl named Zoe and her police superintendent mother. By night, the cat, being called Mr. Cat, works with a burglar named Nico. These lives soon intertwine when Zoe gets involved with a group of gangsters and the black cat needs to help save her. The film was noted for its thriller qualities, being compared to the works of Alfred Hitchcock and graphic designer Saul Bass. Speaking of cats, another one to gloss over is The Rabbi's Cat, directed by Jones Farr and Antoine Delesveux, based on the comic series of the same name, also made by Farr. The story is about a cat who is owned by a rabbi in 1920s Algeria, and the cat obtains the ability to speak through swallowing a parrot. Its freewheeling style and colorful arabesque animation is used to display a divided society. Farr was inspired from American animation of the 1930s, particularly the works of Fleischer Studios, through the way they can portray the darker aspects of society. The filmmakers staged some scenes in live action for the design team to observe and take notes on. The style has been compared to the works of Marc Chagall and the adventures of Tintin. Another little film is called Zarafa, based on a historical giraffe of the same name, the first giraffe to visit France. It tells the story through a grandfather telling the story to his grandkids. He tells them how Maki, a young boy, escapes slave traders and befriends a giraffe, the one named Zarafa. They cross the desert, meet a pirate, and go through many more events while making their way from Africa to Paris. Like I said earlier, this was based on a real giraffe, one given to Charles X of France by Muhammad Ali of Egypt, not to be confused with the boxer, of course. While the film did receive positive reactions, it also has been accused of distorting historical facts about how the giraffe Zarafa was really treated. Since we're talking about properties based on comics and some films based on history, how about mentioning an Academy Award nominated film that does both? That film is simply known as Persepolis. It deals with a Muslim girl who loves things like Iron Maiden and Bruce Lee, as she lives through her experiences of the culture slowly changing around her and forcing her to change as well due to a new leadership. This is based on the autobiographical graphic novel of the same name and is in fact co-directed by the author, Marjan Satrapi. The other director is comic artist Vincent Paranot, and the visual style does match up well with how the novels were presented. It was actually made in black and white so that the characters can easily connect with the audience, showing that one country could easily end up like Iran. While it is a fascinating look at Marjan's perspective and what she went through, it does have a bit of a pro-communistic feeling to it, which can turn people off. Maybe if you want something a little less based on reality, but rather about something more extraordinary, like an alternate dystopian steampunk world, then maybe you'll like April and the Extraordinary World, based on the work of French cartoonist Jacques Tardy. A teen named April and a talking cat named Darwin embark on a quest in this alternate 1941 Paris in order to find her parents. If the original title is anything to go by, Avril et le Monde Truqué translates to April and the Deceptive World, then you can figure that there will be some secrets uncovered along the journey. But maybe you want something different, like stop motion. Then a good one to look at is the Academy Award nominated My Life as a Courgette, though you may know it as My Life as a Zucchini. It is based on the Gilles Paris novel, Autobiographie d'une Courgette, about a boy in Switzerland who just lost his mother, so he is sent to a foster home with other orphans his age, beginning to learn the meaning of trust and true love. It is noted for the unique-looking claymation style, as well as how it was able to tell a story that entertained and tackled dark emotions. Another intriguing piece of stop-motion media to look at is A Town Called Panic, created by Stéphane Aubier and Vincent Patard. It was first an animated short in 1991, and it was slowly developed and turned into 20 episodes of about 5-minute cartoons each. The animation was intentionally crude-looking, as if it was made by a child, right down to the characters looking like cheap toy figurines. It is about the characters cowboy, Indian, and horse, who live together in a small rural town, with the episodes containing slapstick and surreal events. There were a few specials since then, but first came a theatrical film of the same name, directed by the show's creators Aubier and Patard. Cowboy and Indian plan on constructing a barbecue pit for Horse's birthday, but the duo receive 50 million bricks instead of just 50. This destroys their house, and their attempts to rebuild get ruined due to their walls getting stolen constantly. So the trio track down the thieves to the center of the earth, discovering that the culprits are a group of mad scientists. This film adaptation was praised for its quirky, adult sense of humor and has been described as Toy Story on Absinthe. With that film being a hit, Aubier and Patard reteamed again for a new animated project, this time with a third director, Benjamin Renner. The project that came from this collaboration was Academy Award nominated Ernest and Celestine, based on a series of children's books of the same name by Gabrielle Vincent. It takes place in a world where bears live in cities above ground and the mice live underground, both of which have mutual fear and hatred of each other. A mouse named Celestine, however, meets a bear named Ernest, finding a common cause with one another. This leads to them being rejected by both worlds, while the duo begin to develop a true friendship, allowing their true passions to blossom. But they are captured by the authorities, and the prejudices come to full force as both are simultaneously put on trial, trying their best to stand up for themselves and each other. Of course, it got praise for the subject matter it tackled, but what truly stood out was its watercolor art style, which was achieved through special software developed to make this film possible. After the film's success, the third director, Benjamin Renner, went on to co-direct with Patrick Imbert, based on comic books Renner had previously created. The resulting film was The Big Bad Fox and The Other Tales. This film was an anthology with a framing device of a theater production, mainly taking place at the same French farm. The first story is A Baby to Deliver, where a pig, rabbit, and duck take over for a baby delivery for a stork who has apparently broken his wing. The second story is about the titular Big Bad Fox, who is not good at scaring or eating chicken. He takes advice from a wolf to snatch away some chicken eggs and waits for them to become fat, but the chickens think that the fox is their mother. The third and final story is We Must Save Christmas. While setting up decorations, the rabbit and duck accidentally destroy a fake Santa Claus, thinking they killed the real one, so they decided to take over Santa's role, despite Pig trying to tell them that they did not kill the real one. It features a different look and character design, while having a similar watercolor feel like with Ernest and Celestine. Some other animated films to consider include Phantom Boy and Mia and the Migou. Phantom Boy is co-directed by Jean-Luc Felicioli and Alain Gagnon, who both also previously co-directed A Cat in Paris. You can tell by the design of the characters that it is the same team. It takes place in New York, where a detective is injured by a gangster known as the Man with a Broken Face. Alex ends up in a hospital and meets a bedridden 11-year-old named Leo, who has the ability to leave his body and float around like a ghost. So he can also pass through walls and is invisible to everyone else. So Leo helps Alex in tracking down the gangster in order to put a stop to his crimes. Mia and the Migou is a French-Italian co-production about a young girl searching for her father in a tropical Latin American area, which is threatened by the construction of a gigantic hotel. There are mysterious creatures that are trying to stop the construction, and in searching for her father, Mia meets these strange ape-like creatures named Migous. It has a nice-looking hand-painted style, though some have found fault with its storytelling. I have said a lot, but I have one more film to mention before I move on to the animation studios. The last film I want to discuss is an Academy Award-nominated film called The Red Turtle. What is interesting about this film is that it is a co-production between Wild Bunch AG and Studio Ghibli. While Wild Bunch is a German distribution and international sales company, it does distribute to many countries, including France. Also, it first premiered at the Cannes Film Festival, which is in France, and it later got a full theatrical release in France, so it is still partially considered a French film. The Red Turtle is about a man who is shipwrecked on a deserted island, and as he tries to escape, he keeps coming across a red turtle, which changes his life. There is more to the story, but if you want to see for yourself, I won't spoil it. The way it came together, though, is that the head of Wild Bunch met with Hayao Miyazaki and showed him the short animated film Father and Daughter. Miyazaki then asked him to find the director, Dutch animator Michael Dudok de Vie, and then he offered de Vie a chance to have a feature film co-financed by Ghibli. This film was the result, and considering that many people from Ghibli loved a lot of works from foreign countries like France, and the French definitely have a soft spot for anime, it only made sense that a collaboration like this would eventually occur. Now that I have done individual shows and movies, I'm going to talk a little about shows in tandem with companies that produced them. You might be thinking that I forgot some movies, but trust me, I'm not done yet. So the first studio to talk about is SIP Animation. It was known previously as Saban International Paris and mainly animated shows like Saban's The Adventures of the Little Mermaid, Saban's Around the World in 80 Dreams, and Saban's Gulliver's Travels. Some of these shows even had characters that were originally portrayed as humans but were portrayed as animals, like Saban's Adventures of Oliver Twist and Jason and the Heroes of Mount Olympus. But they also made an adaptation of the French comic Is No Good, the comic Walter Mellon, and the original The YY Family. Is No Good is a comic character created by René Goscinny and Jean Tabary in 1962. He was originally a supporting role in the comic The Adventures of Caliph Haroun el-Poussa. However, the Wicked Vizier character was recognized as being more interesting, and the strip quickly became Is No Good. Think Jafar meets Mad Jack the Pirate. Goscinny used the same writing tricks that were employed in Asterix in order to make up for the repetitive format. This comic was translated into the SIP show, which had a few changes like changing the Caliph into a Sultan but still keeping the spirit of the comics intact. The show involved Is No Good, finding ways to overthrow Haroun el-Poussa with the help of his faithful henchman Dila Laraf. But each time something goes wrong, and Poussa is unaware of any wrongdoings that Is No Good attempts. Is No Good's catchphrase is
I want to be Sultan instead of the Sultan!
Walter Mellon is very loosely based on the Franco-Belgian comic Achille Talon. Achille Talon is a vain part of the bourgeoisie and thinks of himself as an intellectual, but has his good traits as well, even being courageous at points. The name Achille Talon derives from Talon d'Achille, which is a French term for an Achilles heel. It suits the character, as Achille Talon's Achilles heel is his large nose. The show titled Walter Mellon is different in that he is an awkward superhero, offering heroics for hire. He often took the place of other heroes like Luke Skywalker, Tarzan, and Superman, and would triumph through pure luck. The YY Family is about a baby who often has questions, often a popular scientific one. The family member he asks the question to then gives an extensive answer in the field of science that they are an expert in. The comedy elements and character designs of YY Family emulate vintage cartoons. Eventually, Saban International Paris became their own company and started to animate works on their own. These include The Tofus, a satirical parody of the environmentalist's lifestyle, Atom or Alpha Teens on Machines, about teens who test prototype vehicles and weapons and use said prototypes to fight villains. Combo Ninos, a Latin American style-inspired show about the juvenile capoeira dancers who can transform into mystical beings in animal form. They touch a totem and are protecting their city of Nova Nizza. And then there's Witch, based on an Italian comic book series about 5 girls who have the magical powers of water, fire, earth, air, and heart. I mean quintessence. They use these powers to fulfill their duties as guardians of the Veil. SIP Animation unfortunately shut down after liquidation, and many of their employees moved on since then. Next studio to talk about is Gaumont. Gaumont was mentioned throughout this video a few times, so they have had a tiny hand in animation before. They did not start television animation, however, until the 90s. They first produced an animated Borderline series based on a cult movie franchise. It was called Highlander, the series, though it was a loose spin-off. Gaumont then produced 2 animated Borderline series based on very similar toys, Dragonflies and Skydancers. Basically, the only 2 differences between the toys is that one is for boys and one is for girls. Dragonflies cartoon is about Dragonators, a set of humans who ride on dragonback in search and rescue operations. Skydancers is about a queen and her students protecting her kingdom from the queen's jealous brother-in-law. The next show they produced was The Magician in 1997, and it aired on Fox in the US 2 years later. It was one of the few European shows to air in the US at the time. It involves a time when a series of radical scientific discoveries and advances led to a reorganized society in the 3rd millennium. Crime syndicates took advantage of the widespread optimism of electricity at the time by discreetly taking over all of the important positions. They are only repeatedly stopped by the titular magician, Ace Cooper, and his magic assistant Cosmo. And no, he is not a fairy. After doing those few Borderline-styled animated shows, the company then switched gears by producing 2 animated shows that were much more comedic in style and tone. These 2 animated series came from the mind of the same man, but before I tell you about them, I should let you know a bit about the man first. Jean-Yves Rambaud. At a teenage age, he had a passion for drawing. He later joined a then small company called Dick Entertainment, learning how to animate cartoons. He helped in launching the series Ulysses 31. Ulysses 31 is a French-Japanese anime series that updates the Greek mythology of Odysseus to the 31st century. Rambaud later decided to move to to Paris to further his career, where he contributed to Albert Barillet's Once Upon a Time, Space, and Once Upon a Time, Live. In 1985, Rambot teamed with Christian Mason to create the studio Jingle. Jingle is where they outsourced series like Spartacus and The Sun Beneath the Sea and Rahan. Jingle helped out with the series Walter Mellon and soon produced their own series, Manu. Manu was based on comics by Frank Margarine, and it was about a teenager named Manu and his own situations in life, often involving his family and Robert, his best friend. Manu aired on La Sang. However, the channel experienced bankruptcy and liquidation, leading many companies to be closed, and Jingle ended up bankrupt. Rambot still was notable enough that Gaumont hired him to help revive the popularity of Asterix and Lucky Luke. He also worked as an artistic director for Highlander, the series. While working with Gaumont, he came up with an idea, and Philip Travers helped him realize the idea, Home for Rent, about shipwrecked space aliens taking refuge in a home for rent. The series soon became Space Goofs, and to Rambot's shock, it became more popular than he could have hoped for, even getting international recognition. He then created his own personal cartoon, Augie and the Cockroaches. Augie and the Cockroaches depicts a cat who is forced to deal with these pesky, mischievous, and sometimes malicious cockroaches. The trio are named after the Ramones, Joey, Marky, and Dee Dee, and Augie's own name was inspired from Iggy Pop and the David Bowie album The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. At least that's what the producer Marc Dupont-Avis claimed. Augie and his friends and enemies sometimes get the better of the cockroaches, though most of the time the cockroaches do win more. In a way, both Augie and the cockroaches have developed a love-hate relationship with each other, as both the cat and the cockroaches will miss each other if separated for too long. Now, to be honest here, I'm not the biggest fan of the show because the premise has been done so many times in other cartoons that it just seems stale to me. I'm not saying there's nothing original to this, it's just that it isn't enough to hold my interest. However, it clearly became an international success, even having some characters making cameos in Space Goofs. There are worse cartoons to watch, so if you like the series, that's fine with me. So again, despite what I think, Augie and the Cockroaches became Rambot's most successful cartoon, but Rambot was not around to live that success. He unfortunately passed away from lung cancer in 1998. Space Goofs and Augie and the Cockroaches continued without him and became Gaumont's biggest hits, but the company did not enjoy them for long. Marc Dupont-Avis, who worked for Gaumont, left the company in 1999 and created his own studio, Chilam Animation. Somehow he was able to acquire the rights for Dragonflies, Sky Dancers, The Magician, Space Goofs, and Augie and the Cockroaches away from Gaumont. Gaumont does still involve itself in animation. They have a subsidiary called Gaumont Animation, which is involved in a variety of shows, from the child-friendly Franklin to the adult-oriented F is for Family. It also produced new films like Franklin and the Turtle Lake Treasure and Eleanor's Secret, the latter of which is about a young boy living with his aunt, the titular Eleanor, and he must save a group of fairy tale characters that have come to life. So now we're moving on to Chilam. They continued producing Augie and the Cockroaches cartoons to international success, which it could easily do because of its silent comedy, though it did garner some controversy over time from an episode that featured a picture depicting a topless woman. But anyway, since Rambot unfortunately passed away, one director of both Space Goofs and Augie, Olivier Jean-Marie, took over and helped keep Augie going. You could say he adapted Augie after losing its biological father. He worked on the series for 4 seasons, from 1998 to 2013, and his last big contribution to the series was Augie and the Cockroaches, the movie. He was successful enough at it that he created his own series in a similar style, Zik and Sharko, in 2010. This is about a hyena named Zik and a shark named, well, Sharko. They live on a volcanic island, and the conflict is that Zik wants to eat a mermaid named Marie, but Sharko always protects her because he loves her. Just like Augie, there is virtually no dialogue in the cartoons. Of course, Chilam is not just known for those cartoons. They also dabbled in different styles and tones, such as Kaena, The Prophecy, a CGI film that was initially meant to be a video game. The man who created the film, Chris Delaporte, left Eric Chahi's Amazing Studios company halfway through the production of their only game, Heart of Darkness. Chris then took it to Chilam and made it into a movie instead, and it is probably one of the first, if not the first, CGI movies made by France. Unfortunately for Chris, the film was a critical and commercial failure. Still, Shilam continued to produce shows like The New Adventures of Lucky Luke and Rahan, as well as Tupu about a semi-wild girl and a kind of magic, about a magical family including a fairy mother and an ogre father exiled to Earth. However, their other most successful show was called Shuriken School. It is about a school for ninjas, as those were popular at the time, and the cast includes a boy who wants to be a ninja and not sell rice balls, another boy who pretends to be more streetwise than he is, and a girl who is the most well-studied. The show was short-lived, but still successful enough to spawn its own movie, Shuriken School: The Ninja Secret. One final thing to note is that the last movie Sheila made, which was its first movie to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature, and the first movie of Shilams to be rated R. The movie I'm referring to is I Lost My Body. It is an adult animated fantasy drama about a hand that got cut off from a dissection lab and is trying to get back to its body, scrambling through the pitfalls of Paris and remembering the life of the man it was attached to, Nothel, and the time they met a girl, Gabrielle. Another notable animation company from France is Futuricon. It is an independent production company created in 1996 by Philippe Delarue, which produced quite a number of animated shows. One animated show worth a bit of discussion is called The Little Devils, though it has been retitled to Sweet Little Monsters in other countries. It is based on a series of comics by Olivier Dutot and adapted into a cartoon by Vincent Gosti. It's about Tom and Nina Page, two children who often cleverly and deviously try to get around their parents in order to do something that their parents don't want the kids to do. There is often a sibling war between the duo, much to the dismay of their parents and their cat. The art style does remind me of some of those old comic strips you may see on newspapers. Another show by the company to discuss is Mini Justicière, directed by Norman J. Leblanc, Richard Danto, Raphael Lamarck, and Prakash Topsy, and based on a series of books by Hélène Brullier and Zep. Mini Justicière is about various animal kids, each one having some sort of abnormality, disability, personality trait, or quirk that leads to them getting scorned. However, after a sudden power surge, i.e. they briefly became overly muscular. Yeah, that happens every episode. Their weakness ends up becoming a superpower. Mini Justicière translates to Mini Avengers, but when they did the homegrown English dub, it was called the Mini Mighty Kids, possibly so people wouldn't mistakenly think it was related to a certain mainstream superhero group. You know, the Justice League. The show had 3 seasons, the second one being mainly based on 5 of the kids: Marianne, Ivan, Nathan, Eleanor, and Greg. The third season had new characters, but switched from traditional animation to Flash. One other show I would like to highlight is Kaput and Zöski, based on the comic book series from Louis Trondheim. It is about these 2 aliens, a small fat one named Kaput, who is short-tempered and volatile, and a tall and skinny one named Zöski. He is usually cunning and level-headed. They travel to many planets in order to conquer them. However, they never truly succeed in this goal. They barely get a few days before failing to take over the planet. They end up running away just as much as they enslave inhabitants, if not more so. They're kind of like 2 Invader Zims, though instead of being on a dystopian Earth, they are situated in many different planets. 2 more shows to mention have the same creator, Malo Corrigan, fully known as Mala Corrigan, and The Space Tracers, created by Norman J. LeBlanc and Arthur Kwok. It is about 200 planets that form into a league after centuries of war in order to retain the peace they have achieved. Interplanetary transport became their main reason for the unity and stability of the league, with companies good and bad making vast profits. The few independents are known as tracers, valuing their freedom and face many dangerous obstacles to get their cargo delivered in record time. The most famous tracers are Malo Corrigan and his crew aboard their ship, the Stardew. This other show is also created by Arthur Kwok. It is a show called Dragon Hunters, which is about 2 men, Lian Chu, a kind-hearted, honorable, sword-wielding, muscle-bound dragon slayer, and Guizdo, the negotiating, greedy, egotistical, cynical, and unsympathetic brains of the group. They also have a pet sidekick dragon named Hector. The 2 men knew each other since childhood. They are flat broke, constantly working on finding another dragon hunting contract that will help them pay rent. The Dragon Hunters show actually received a CGI movie, and it included the voice of Oscar-winning actor Forrest Whitaker. The last show to mention is arguably Futuricon's most famous one, Minuscule, a 3D series of shorts that show a bird's-eye view on the day-to-day existence of insects. This view is distorted through a burlesque yet poetic lens. The stories are usually self-contained and humorous. The insects often display enjoyment, intelligence, and sometimes pathos. Minuscule has been said to be what happens if you take the insect documentary century microcosmos and blend it with Tex Avery. The show gained 2 feature films, Minuscule Valley of the Lost Ants in 2013 and Minuscule Mandibles from Far Away in 2018. Another company to talk about is Moonscoop Group. One of its predecessors was France Animation, which became one of the producers of the previously mentioned Spartacus and The Sun Beneath the Sea. France Animation was brought by Ant Films production in the early 2000s, becoming Moonscoop. In 2014, the comic publishing company Dargo got permission to take over Moonscoop's library, becoming the company's catalog of creations. The company created many shows using a few subsidiaries, although only a few of these shows really stood out. One of these shows is Funky Cops, which is a show that takes place in San Francisco in the 70s. This time period seems to be reflected quite well in the art style and the music of the show, with the opening theme being created by DJ Abadal. It revolves around 2 cops, Ace Anderson and Dick Kowalski, 2 semi-competent cops who often show more of an interest in disco dancing and being cool. However, they will still be able to handle and solve cases by the end of the day. There were 2 English dubs of this show, one of them done by 4Kids, of course applying their brand of censorship to the show, so Dick became Jack. Since we talked about one cop show, how about another? Patrol 3 is another interesting show involving a trio of cops, a stretchy bloodhound dog, a wheelchair-bound ice fox, and a fat rat, who are working to solve and stop crimes. Said crimes have usually been committed by their corrupt cat police captain. The trio are aware that the captain is up to no good, but do not have the evidence to turn her in, so they end up having to play along while upholding the law, which they are often able to do, even when other policemen don't take them seriously. The company also handled production on the American-British-Taiwanese co-production Hero 108, based loosely on the ancient Chinese novel Water Margin. However, no matter what, Moonscoop's biggest contribution to animation is arguably the 2D-3D hybrid Code Lyoko. Code Lyoko is an anime-esque TV series that involved a group of kids going into virtual reality to battle a multi-agent system. The real world within the cartoon was done in traditional 2D animation, while the computer world was created using 3D animation. It kind of reminds me of how they did The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. It got its origins from a short film called The Children Make Their Movies, which later evolved into a pilot called The Garage Kids by Thomas Roman and Tanya Palumbo. The pilot had a few differences, such as the virtual reality being called Xanadu rather than Lyoko, but were not huge changes. Just before the show got started, Thomas moved on to another anime-inspired show, which we will get to later. The show revolves around Jeremy Belpois and his 3 friends who found out about an old supercomputer they activate that houses a virtual reality called Lyoko. Jeremy meets an artificial intelligence named Alita trapped within and learns of a malevolent, autonomous, and highly intelligent system named Zana. The multi-agent system possesses objects to wreak havoc on the real world, with the ultimate goal of killing all of humanity. The 4 kids are trying to put a stop to it, along with Jeremy trying to figure out a way to free Alita from the virtual reality into the real world. The show lasted for 4 seasons and even had a sequel series, Code Lyoko Evolution. This show was in live action in the real world, but still had the CGI in the virtual world. And if you're curious about watching that one, be warned, it ended on a cliffhanger. By the way, if you wanted to know what the other show it was that Thomas Drummond went on to help make, that was Oban Star Racers, produced by SAV, the World Productions, and created by Savan Yerman Eiffel, originally being produced as a short movie titled Molly Star Racer. Star Racers is another anime-esque show, except this one is actually a co-production with Japan. It takes place 62 years from now, when Earth is invited to intergalactic race, the Great Race of Oban, where any winner could possibly have a wish granted. Eva Wei escapes from boarding school to meet with her father, Don Wei, whom does not recognize her after sending her to boarding school after many years ago. Don is the best race manager on Earth, and Eva uses this opportunity under the guise of a mechanic named Molly to enter the race in order to potentially win the wish so that she may revive her deceased mother. There is supposedly a sequel or spin-off in the works, but the show last aired in 2006, so I doubt either of those shows are happening. Speaking of anime-esque cartoons, our next company to look at is Marathon Media. It was originally founded by Olivier Bremont and Pascal Breton in 1990. In 2008, it was acquired by Zodiac Media, which in turn was merged with the Bunny J Group in 2016. In the process, this caused Marathon to be folded. When they first started, though, they experimented with a few shows. They had some that were more cartoony looking, like the Mozart Band and the Secret World of Santa Claus, and they also created borderline shows Kasai and Luke and Mythic Warriors, Guardians of the Legend. The company was even responsible for the second Marsupilami series. However, what truly got them recognition intention was a show that blended the borderline anime art style with spy comedy and teen drama, Totally Spies. Totally Spies was created with an anime style, and possibly the first of its kind outside Japan. Created by Vincent Chalvon de Mercier and David Michel, it was made with the intention of giving something for girls to admire. The creators were inspired by various spy movies and shows, as well as the rising female pop stars of the late 90s. Totally Spies was also noted to be a French TV series that was co-produced by the USA, and was arguably, for better or worse, the most successful at it. It focuses on 3 teenage girls, Sam, Alex, and Clover, who work as spies for the World Organization of Human Protection, or WOOF. In their normal lives, the girls are dealing with high school or university drama, stuff like relationships and teenage rivalries. When they're doing their spy job, they usually deal with vengeful and disgruntled criminals who feel they have been wronged in the past. Sometimes these villains come back to get revenge on the girls for getting them arrested. Totally Spies came out just at the right time, when the Pierce Brosnan James Bond was popular and the first movie version of Charlie's Angels became a financial hit, which led to a market of spy-related media. Plus, the all-female factor of Charlie's Angels did help Totally Spies get some attention. Even Kim Possible and codename Kids Next Door came out the year after Totally Spies, which more or less helped keep this espionage craze going. Although when people tend to talk about Totally Spies now, they think it may have gotten popular for different reasons. But regardless, the show received enough attention that it received a prequel film after its 5th season, released in theaters in France, and got a spin-off series known as The Amazing Spies, starring 4 siblings, 3 boys and a girl, with the connection between the 2 shows being the reoccurring role of Whoop's boss, Jerry. The other characters from Totally Spies, including Alex, Sam, and Clover, have made occasional appearances. This popularity of Totally Spies could even be felt in Marathon's later shows. They had a few that leaned more to Western animation, those being Get Blake and Atomic Betty, though only in the 3rd season of the latter. However, the majority of their other cartoons since Totally Spies were heavily anime inspired. The list includes Mission Odyssey, Martin Mystery, Team Galaxy, Gormiti, Wreck-It Rabbit, Redikai, Conquer the Kairu, and Lolly-Rock. Martin Mystery probably got the most recognition out of all of them. It was a French-Italian co-production based on the Italian comic book series of the same name, but very loosely based. The main characters Martin and Diana were adults in the comic, but became teenagers in the cartoon, as well as step-siblings. They work with an organization known as the Center, which covertly protects Earth from supernatural threats. The group has allies, including a small green-skinned alien named Billy and a 200,000-year-old caveman named Java. Martin has an ego, but also a vast knowledge of the supernatural and a remarkable intuition, which is why he is a valued member of the organization. The shows were considered successful enough that Martin appeared in Totally Spies in a crossover episode. The last company I wish to discuss is Method Animation, also known as Norman Studios or ON Animation Studios. This company mainly, if not exclusively, produces CGI shows and movies, and you already know my feelings towards those. However, it would be unfair of me to not acknowledge some of these, as they have gained some popularity in their own rights, so I will mention a few of their productions. One production is Skyland, a French co-production with Canada and Luxembourg, with Method working alongside Canada's 9 Story Entertainment. The animation was made in using motion capture for their characters. It is about how Earth shattered into billions of pieces, now orbiting a central core, becoming Skyland. With this event, an evolved form of humans appeared, Saiyajins. They can absorb energy from sunlight and use this energy for various special abilities, including but not limited to telekinesis and energy balls. Skyland is ruled by an organization that controls water supplies and maintains its power from Saiyajins, indoctrinated and trained from childhood. The organization is the Sphere, and these Saiyajins are known as Guardians. This is a dictatorship, and it is fought by pirates. The 2 main characters, Mahad and Lena, are taken by the pirates after their mother gets taken by the Sphere, so the siblings join the pirate rebellion to save their mother. Another show to mention is Free Phonics, a British show that Method helped with the animation. It is about the titular band who discovered a way to fight their rivals, Mantis, by using the power of the 13th note. It is a force that can bend space, time, and minds when the perfect sound is created. These rivals meeting results in an explosive sound clash, where all the opposing forces do battle as all the energies of the 13th note are released. What is almost inarguably the biggest show to come out of Method was with a co-production with another French company, Zactoon, as well as Japanese company Toei Animation. This show is known as Miraculous Tales of Ladybug and Cat Noir. The series was based on a concept by Thomas Astruck. He was inspired from comic books and Japanese anime, as well as meeting with a certain lady. He was working on Atom and Witch years prior, and while working on the latter, he met a woman wearing a t-shirt with a ladybug on it. They shared drawings together, some of which being ladybug themed. The main female character of Ladybug and Cat Noir had a hairstyle similar to the real-life woman. Astruc thought about making it a comic book until meeting Jeremy Zak, who had experience in marketing children and family entertainment, but not so much in animation. Still, Zak thought that Ladybug would be better suited as a cartoon, so when Zak created the company Zaktoon, Ladybug and Cat Noir soon became one of the company's productions. They were hoping to create a glamorous superhero with European flair. Cat Noir, inspired by Catwoman and Spider-Man, came also because Ladybug represented good luck, so a hero Black Cat should be her partner to represent bad luck. Toei came on board after creating a Precure film set in Paris, so the company was interested in expanding to an international audience. The production originally was presented in 2D anime-styled animation, and while the trailer gained interest, the production companies had worries about releasing the show in this format due to the unfortunate declining interest in 2D. Not to mention there was some difficulty of animating the Ladybug character in the 2D style, so they moved to 3D animation, with the help of South Korean animation company Samk, to create some dynamic mobile camera angles in the 3D world. So with this version, the show takes place in modern-day Paris, where the half-French, half-Chinese marionette Dupont Sheng takes on the form of Ladybug, and Adrian Agreste takes on the form of Cat Noir, both superheroes fighting evil whether it arises. They both use magical jeweled objects, known as miraculous, to transform. Neither character knows about their true identities. They work together to protect Paris from a mysterious villain named Hawkmoth, who tries to steal their powers by using Akuma butterflies, turning citizens into supervillains through the negative energy infused in the butterflies. It became popular enough that an animated film and a live-action series is in the works. They have a number of other shows, but now I wish to talk about the movies Method created. The first one to mention is a tech noir film known as Renaissance. It is about a corporation called Avalon, a provider of eternal youth and beauty. It worms its way into every facet of life in the closely monitored city, Paris, in 2054. Ilona, a scientist for Avalon, is kidnapped, so the company calls upon a cop with a reputation for finding anyone, no matter what it takes. Barthélemy Carras. Carras soon realizes that he is not the only one looking for Ilona. As witnesses start turning up dead, it uses motion capture for its animation, and it has Sin City-like look to the CGI animation. The company's next film is a sci-fi, action, horror, and psychological thriller, The Prodigies. It is based on the novel The Night of the King's Children, and it is about how 5 prodigies are assaulted in Central Park and plot revenge on their attackers. The movie did not turn out so well. For many, it was too adult for children, but too childish for adults. Their next movie did much better for them critically. That movie is Mune, Guardian of the Moon. This movie is about a small fawn and a girl made of wax who help Sohon, the apprentice of the Guardian of the Sun, when the evil ruler of the underworld steals the sun away from Sohon. They need to help get the sun back, or else order in the universe will be destroyed. The film was inspired from the atmosphere of the movies of Terry Gilliam, and it has been highlighted for its inventiveness and its extraordinary aesthetics. I did like that one part where the film has a 2D animated section. It did tickle my interest in that regard. Then came their next film, titled The Little Prince. Interestingly, Method had a television show of The Little Prince a few years prior, a co-production with DQ Entertainment, involving the titular prince exploring many planets. However, that show had nothing to do with the movie other than being based on the same source material. The movie is about a little girl who's being disciplined by her mother to follow a strict schedule that supposedly leads to success. One day, the little girl meets an elderly aviator who lives next door, and he tells her the story about the little prince, even stating how he met the prince in the Sahara Desert. It helps her to rediscover her childhood, learning how human connections matter most. The film is mainly in CGI animation, like Method's previous works, but when the story of the little prince is being told, the animation is done in complete stop-motion animation. The way that the stop-motion is implemented is simple yet beautiful, and does feel very European. Now, no matter how you feel about the movie, one thing that cannot be denied is that the film is actually the most successful animated movie from France that went abroad, and probably hopefully sparked some people's imaginations, which can be said about nearly all of these animated projects. There are probably a few that I missed, but the video is already long enough, and I don't want to keep you here forever. I'm sure that there are quite a few pieces of French animation you are now made aware of, or you are glad I highlighted. Of course, not everything from France is great in my eyes, but I'm sure some of you still appreciated them and saw some value that I didn't. Considering that the country is known for the art it displays, it makes sense that a great many notable pieces of animation originated from the French. I appreciated how they explored different types of animation while making their own mark on the history of the art form, and I hope to see more. This has been Anton, and you've been watching Non-Animated on Tunes. Au revoir!